This is Arachnarun, a platformer where you play as a spider running away from a vacuum, and this is the story of how I made it. It was the GMTK Game Jam. I had 48 hours to make and submit a game that fit the theme of role reversal. I entered the jam at the end of a 2-week episode of feeling rather tired and out of it, but I was excited to participate and hoped that finishing a small project would give me that boost that I needed to get back into the swing of things. I had a number of ideas for the game, but I kept coming back to one in particular, a vacuum simulator, except you're the thing being vacuumed. And what's a creature that often finds itself being hunted by a vacuum? A spider. But something seemed oddly familiar about this premise, and it didn't take long for me to figure it out. But when I did, I was even more excited. That's right, I get to rip off Mario again. This is Dust Buddies, a minigame from Mario Party DS where you run from a vacuum and hurdle various obstacles in order to be the last one standing. I wanted to essentially remake the core of this game, but build on the foundation to create an even more exhilarating experience with twists and turns and platforming. Instead of a straight path along the floor, I wanted to tour the player around an entire house with different challenges in every room. I wanted the game to be an on-rails platformer. You'd still be able to move around the screen, but the overall path and camera movements would all be predetermined by yours truly. I figured Godot would have some tools to get me started, and it did. These are path nodes, which are mathematically defined curves that can be guided into different shapes using control points, and interpolated along by path follow nodes. In short, train track, train cart. And on my track were 2 carts, the player in front and the camera in the back. I had to fix some curve-related camera issues, but then it was time to make the player dance. One of the first things the movement code does is cancel out the movement of the cart, thereby making it appear as if the player isn't in the cart at all. And yet I can still easily limit the player's movement based on its local position to prevent the player from drifting off screen or taking an unintended route and getting lost. The player will also face in the same direction as the parent cart, and when the player encounters an invisible curve in the road, they will naturally turn to follow it. This effect is amplified by placing the camera in a second cart slightly further behind, like sitting in the back of a roller coaster. This also emphasizes the theme, role reversal. By putting the vacuum model in the same cart as the camera, it implies that you're seeing the spider from the point of view of the vacuum, sort of a second-person perspective. And with that, I had basic gameplay. For the visuals, I wanted to try a cel-shaded style. I soon came across Raphael Bordoni's awesome custom shader and downloaded the code. I didn't get the outlines working because I couldn't be bothered to read how to, but even without them, I think it looks pretty good. Spider time! 2 round segments, 8 stick legs. I made a basic gradient texture, aligned the UVs, and went through a number of different color combinations before settling on this violet blue. I wanted to make the eyes relatable, but not overly cutesy. Spiders have 8 eyes, and while I could have just lowered the number to make it look more human, I decided to instead shape the eyes to convey emotion, while still looking spidery. I made the first set of eyes small, like little nostrils. I made the second and third set pretty straightforward, and with the last set, I went for a thinner, angled eyebrow shape. Did I make a concerned looking spider? I think I did. When I started animating, I had no understanding of spider movement, beyond it being kind of creepy and laggy. But I found a wonderful video that broke it down, the dynamics of each pair of legs and how it all joins together. I didn't spend a lot of time animating it, and if you look at each pair of legs individually, it does look a little off, but altogether, it's pretty good. I need the butt to jiggle though. That is a necessity right now. And with the spider modeled and animated, I began my search for music on OpenGameArt.org. There, I found a song called Countdown to Myocardial Infarction. Apparently, this is a track from Reimagine the Game that was released for anyone to use. So, I used it in my game, and it fits the action pretty well. The beginning of the song really began to shine once I paired it with a cutscene. Not inspired by anything in particular, of course. Now, this is very much a summary of what happened. And in all honesty, the game had been progressing rather slowly thanks to my sluggish and inconsistent work ethic. At this point, it was 4 in the morning on the last day. I was pulling an all-nighter and had to model a vacuum. And despite my encroaching delirium, I ended up with this thing, which, ugly as it is, still manages to resemble a vacuum. And then I modeled the obstacles. Popcan with soda pop label, book by Arthur, and cheesies. There were only a few hours remaining, and I didn't even have a basic level set up, so I imported what I had to get something made before my brain totally fizzled out. Mesh, textures, cel-shaded materials. I coded the objects to get vacuumed. Collisions, collision layers, scaling. Finally, I had some stuff to work with. I threw it together in a scene and put together the best level I could muster. Pile of Cheetos, books, a stack of pop cans, and a little spiral platforming section. I submitted the game in the last hour and passed out. So that was my submission. cool opening cutscene, background music, and a flat floor with a few random props tossed about. The game wasn't as complete as I would have liked, but to be fair to myself... Nah, I couldn't be fair to myself. If this was my first game jam, sure, but even compared to other projects that I made in 48 hours, this was pretty bad. And it was entirely my fault, no beating around the bush. Despite my goal of dedicating my undivided attention to this project, my weekend effort was spent mostly zoning out or sleeping, with the occasional hour-long burst of effort here and there. By the time I got my act together, it was too late, and this was the best I could manage. But I wasn't willing to leave it that way. As some abandoned dump, this game could be so much more. I knew that. And not just because Dust Buddies was so much more. This game could be so much more in its own unique way, if it was actually given the time. In Dust Buddies, you walk in a straight line across some buttons and fabric, and that's it. It's awesome. It's one of my favorite minigames, but I wanted my game to be bigger. I wanted corners, curves, platforms, weird obstacles. I wanted to take the player beyond the floor on a tour of an entire house. I wanted to take this thing that was too basic to even be called a cheap clone and make it something special. This was my plan. A house with 5 distinct furnished rooms and a myriad of obstacles corresponding to each one. I would dedicate the next week just to making models and the following week to finishing the game. Surprise, surprise, both weeks took double the time. Table, chairs, toilet sink, fork, knife, spoon, egg, sponge, tire, ducky, couch, cutting board, coffee table, comic book, whisk. Just to name a few of the many things that I worked on over the next 2 weeks. Should I have just bought an asset pack online? Yeah, but was it worth doing it myself? No, but I still learned a lot. I made some cool discoveries and came up with some neat solutions to different problems along the way. The shower curtains are one flat plane, but they have a wavy look to them, and that's all thanks to an art program that I used in kindergarten. There's an effect called metal, and it lets you draw this quote-unquote metal texture. And layering this on a polka dot pattern created the desired effect. When applying a carpet texture, I came across a different problem. The texture I found had the perfect look, but it didn't tile. A quick Google search for "make texture seamless" led me to this miracle of a site that does it for you. It works phenomenally, and it makes it really easy to make textures out of whatever photos I have around. My pipeline for creating pretty much every object was this. I'd gather some reference and throw it in PureRef, create an approximation of the shape and make smaller changes from there. I would then add materials, maybe paint on some textures, and then I was done. Sometimes I would do fun things, like make a duck almost entirely using metal balls, or make a whisk that utilizes a transparent plane for its loops, or take a 3D scan of my favorite webkins. Every 3D model I used was made by me. At some point, I downloaded a jerry can from OpenGameArt just so that I could take a texture and remix it for my own jerry can model. I spent weeks making all this stuff. And the kicker? A lot of it either isn't visible or didn't make it into the game. Speaking of which, it was time to import everything, and right there was when it clicked in my head just how much work finishing this game would be. Modeling is a slow process, but setting up each and every one of those assets in-game was far more arduous. I had to set the export settings for each bun file, import each asset individually and test that everything exported correctly. Set the node type, add materials, add textures, write scripts for specific behaviors. Each of them needed a custom collision solution and a custom visibility notifier solution so that they would be deleted when off screen. Scaling, custom sound effects, so much manual implementation for item after item after item. It had been several weeks since the jam, and I was feeling pretty impatient with this project. It had become clear that despite all my efforts, if I wanted this game to meet my original vision, I would have to do a lot more. Walls, lights, appliances, furniture, decor. At the pace I was going, it would probably take a few weeks to get it all done. A very dull and repetitive few weeks. I was feeling a lot better than I had been during the jam, and just wanted to move on from this project and work on something else. So just like that, I said, forget my original vision. I'll clean up what I've got, put together a simple, straightforward level to show off some of the obstacles, and then I'm done, and I can move on. Just like that, my goal had changed from expand upon Dust Buddies to just remake the dang thing. There's nothing wrong with that. With this change in mindset, the dull dread began to wash away and my excitement returned. I could make a decent little clone, that didn't seem so bad, and that's probably what my goal should have been for the original jam. Of course I wasn't going to create an entire roller coaster through a house in 2 days. Could I have gotten a lot more done than I did? For sure, but not that. I began putting together a level with all of this in mind. I tilted the camera down to hide the background, and laid out a level to follow in a straight path. I carefully considered how much of the floor would be visible, and how far left and right the player could actually go, and laid things out in a way that was fun to navigate without being too contrived. With my new goal in mind, there wasn't a whole lot that I had left to do, and there was something freeing about that. But despite this new goal, I found myself making changes. The jam game, for all it lacked, did at least have some twists and turns, and even a section where you climb up a spiral book staircase. So I at least had to have something like that. Just a few turns to make it interesting. And from there I thought, well, since we're climbing this coffee table anyway, might as well stay up here and climb around on the couch as well. And since we're climbing on a couch, might as well climb up to the kitchen counter too. And so the level continued to evolve. I had all these props for a bathroom, so I figured I might as well use them. And even though I didn't have enough furniture for a whole house, I could at least hint at certain themes. With my expectations lowered, each of these additions suddenly felt super valuable, and the prospect of creating them had become exciting again. Instead of every addition falling short of my goal, it exceeded it. It's the classic under-promise, over-deliver, but I had done it to myself. For each room, I'd start by placing just enough objects to create a path for the player to traverse. Then, I'd fill the room with garbage. Once in a while, I'd have a specific design idea, but for the most part, I was just scattering stuff all over. I made tons of tweaks and changes as I went along. I reprogrammed most of the physics objects because of poor performance. I made more models such as a TV, kitchen appliances, and a garage door. I changed animations, reworked lights, and recorded sound effects. I went from spending a few hours a day slowly and painfully pushing through the slog, groaning at the sheer amount of work left, to putting in almost all of my waking hours, filled with excitement about this little project, and feeling accomplished when I realized how much I had done. And just a week after deciding to axe my original vision, I had brought it to fruition. I had some people playtest it, made some adjustments, and then I was done. I had recreated Dust Buddies and put my own spin on it. It had fewer features, less polish, and more bugs, of course, but I was happy with the result. This game was supposed to take me 2 days to complete, but instead, it took me over a month. But you know what? I think it's one of my best games yet. So even though I keep finding myself underestimating how long a project is going to take, and trust me, I find it more frustrating than you do, and it's not something I take pride in, I think my games are getting better. So was it worth spending over a month on this thing? I don't know. You tell me. I'm gonna go work on something else now. The game is available to download for free if you would like to play. Ciao for now.